Well, it's the calm before the storm. You can see that the room is all set up. We're expecting to have a dozen journalists join us shortly to taste 3 flights of 16 wines, and we're going to go through them 6 at a time. We have a cool climate flight, a warm climate flight, and a winemaker's expression flight. And at the end of each flight, we'll collect those scores and find out what their impressions are. Of course, we have wines from Quails Gate hidden in the 3 flights. Because we're here to try and look at their Chardonnay program, benchmark it against some of the greatest wines in the world.
I think it's pretty rare to get a tasting of this caliber. It's the first one I've done, certainly, and even winemakers 10 years my senior, I'd be skeptical how many opportunities they've had to do something like this. It's pretty exciting to get everyone in the same room.
We've been making wine here and Burgundian varietals here in the Okanagan for over 30 years. And it's good every once in a while to kind of touch base and see what the rest of the world is doing. We have 2 Rosemary's blocks, 2019 and 2021. 2019, from an Okanagan perspective, was a little cooler vintage. And 21 is an interesting vintage because it's the famous heat dome that we faced. And so it was a warmer vintage, but interestingly, it has expressed itself in the wines in a way that would be unexpected. So the wines can be very flavorsome, but also very fresh and with lots of piercing acidity. So it'll be an interesting point of discussion to compare. The other vintage is 2020 with the Stewart Family Reserve, and I would say that would be a very good classic vintage for the Okanagan. Not too hot, not too cold.
I think doing these benchmark tastings are important for 2 reasons. One, it's kind of to know where you stack up from a quality perspective, but also just stylistically where the Okanagan fits in on a world stage and better understanding our terroir here. I mean, my objective was to make every wine in the tasting look as great as possible. So we weren't looking for duds or dogs, it was looking for just 18 really great Chardonnays and letting the judges decide what shows best on that day.
West Kelowna Chardonnay, it's definitely leaning more towards New World, maybe not California, maybe a bit like Oregon. I probably wouldn't place it in Burgundy myself. It's sometimes similar to our neighbors and friends in Ontario, depending on the vintage.
Right off the bat, I have total expectation that our wines will show really, really well, because Chardonnay is so strong in Canada. But it's really important to just sort of talk about styles and what the Okanagan is bringing to Chardonnay that maybe other places aren't.
Yeah, I think the way they say that you can judge a wood-fired or a stone-fired pizza place by taste the margarita, because it's it shows you the basics and then you can riff from there. I think Chardonnay has that kind of same kind of touchstone. It's like you learn a lot about a winery or a winemaker by tasting what they put forward in their bottles of Chardonnay.
Kind of a little bit arbitrary. It's arbitrary because I just decided where to flight them. And obviously cool versus warm, it's a very thin line. So I think disagree with how I flighted them by all means, but it's just meant to provoke conversation and ultimately have an idea of where does Okanagan Chardonnay and Kelowna Chardonnay fit in that conversation too.
We don't have a lot of BC wines in this tasting, even wines from Canada, so that's not the game today. The game today is to just have a look at what's going on in the world of Chardonnay, and mostly to get some feedback from the winemakers, who also want to get a lot of feedback from you guys about what you're seeing in the glass. So we'll see what's happening with these wines.
If I was on a desert island, that's what I would have. I think it's the descriptors for it were non-stop, but I think close to a wine that was perfection.
It's like this super ugly but really charming, charismatic kind of wine. Like I liked all of those ugly bits about it that just kind of seemed to work at the end. I liked the wine because it was ugly.
Could we just say complexity for the normal person?
Really complex. Yeah.
I really liked Elise's notes, and I had said many similar things, sort of the broader palette, the oak sort of showing up on the finish. I thought there was, I wrote that I thought it was just more restrained, a little bit tighter, a touch mineral, but that broad palette, and I absolutely agree, it was very hard to come after number 2, so I kind of went back to this one.
I thought this was one of the most complete and age-worthy wines of the flight. I really pushed out for it. 96, serious, was oak-derived, but and developing. Had the wild frame mint nose that 1 and 2 had, but I think it was a bit cleaner and more. Love the kind of yellow apple, custard apple thing that's going on. Super rich and rewarding. There's a real through line of juicy acidity to go with that. Love the finish. Kind of love the whole thing, and I think it is going to age like clockwork. I thought it was a beautiful expression of Chardonnay.
I just thought it was one-dimensional. Like I was waiting for some spark or some electricity at the end, and I didn't get it. Here's what you've been tasting.
Nice.
Awesome. Evansdad.
Yeah, I was pretty sure that was the one. Oh, wow. Wow. Wow.
The first round of wines was really interesting. I did think that number 4 was our wine, so I kept quiet on that. The Oregon wine that was in there was a great wine to compare against, the Felton Road, the French wines as well. So it was a great lineup, and I think we took a lot away from just that very first flight, and we've still got 2 more to go.
It's hard to go into a tasting like that and to put aside looking for the wines that are archetypal cool climate wines. However, as soon as I started tasting the wines, I felt that even within that flight of 6 wines, there was quite a lot of diversity. And obviously, style will always play into it. And I think the results were actually very gratifying. For me, the wine that I really liked was what I gravitate towards when I drink, which was a Chablis.
I think where we're at for Canadian Chardonnay is, we're in that kind of golden age. I think it's so good, but we don't know about it because we're Canadian and we don't like to say that we're so good. It's the grape that unites us from coast to coast. It's the grape that we really should be banging a drum for, despite the fact that everyone makes it. I think it's because everyone makes it. We should be saying Chardonnay is it, and put a flag in the ground on it, because it's it's not to say it's same. There is no Canadian Chardonnay. There's no Kelowna Chardonnay. There's not one size fits all. It is a myriad of styles that are all really convincing and compelling. I think I know the wine. I think it's that Catena wine.
That's where I went.
So it is an expression of place. Totally. It's just, it trumps the variety, and isn't that kind of what you want in Chardonnay? Yeah. So, but it's so atypical. Yeah. It's so minty, eucalyptus. Yeah. So it stands alone. Yeah. So check.
There's good like tortilla minus the meat, like all the spices that go. Yeah, like the meat pie, like it's like oniony and clovey.
I can use that.
This one I found there was a lot of citrus, lemon, custard, quite a bit of prominent toast on the nose, and then on the palate it was a bit on the lighter side, and there was quite a bit of oak tannin on the finish on this one that stuck out a little bit, but it was overall still had a lot of nice acidity and a lot of nice things going forward as well.
Could you make this one?
Maybe.
Really? No, I mean, could you make this wine? Not is it your wine?
I was thinking 2 or 4. I like the style. I would like it a lot more if there just wasn't that little bit of extra oak tannin on the palate and on the nose.
I use the word aspirational because you can see somebody's trying really hard to work with this fruit, to work with this wine, to make it into something and to say something. And
Rich, a bit obvious, really. I found, warmth on the palate again, some stickiness in the texture, a little bit of viscosity, which is I found a bit off-putting. The acid I thought was pretty well calibrated, but in the end it didn't leave you with a very clean sense of cleanness. It left you really with that stickiness and a bit of blurred sense of blurred finish at the end.
Well, especially with that alcohol level in there, it's almost like a vapored finish, where like looking at like a hot road, right?
Excited about this wine. I literally wrote, "Oh yeah," on my note. The alcohol is a little bit elevated for sure, but like the acid was really beautifully integrated, and like I thought it was like really high quality, light toasted barrels, and definitely a barrel ferment. So you just get like this really like beautiful wholeness and richness to it, but it had this like delicate nature to it and a little bit of like layered texture to it, and I would like to drink more of it.
Yeah, I really like this wine actually, and I thought of the whole flight. If this is warm climate, this is the one that's coolest climate within the warm climate. Yeah. Whether by design or altitude or whatever is creating that, I found this would not have known a place in the first flight for me. Had a lot of that same sort of reductive pear, lots of lovely oak, hazelnut. It was balanced, excellent length. I just really like this wine overall.
Just the right amount of reduction for me. Like you can hardly notice it, but you notice it.
Everything's in proportion here.
Yeah, really well done. It was a top scoring wine for me.
I like the idea that 3 and 5 were kind of going in the same direction stylistically, where you're on the peach, the vanilla, the corn on the cob, and you're on the really classic signature of a Chardonnay from warm climate. So 3 and 5 for me were kind of like squeezing this pour number 4 that was a little bit more elegant, a little bit more reductive, a little bit more delicate. So number 5 overall, it has a style and it has a clientele. Working for the Ritz, I can tell you that I have a clientele for this, and they don't get tired of drinking these kind of wines. So I have to say, for the style, well done.
This is dialed in winemaking, showing Chardonnay at a very high level. It was my highest scoring wine of the flight. I love so much about it. Refreshing, rewarding style, that al dente pasta texture of this wine, persistent poise, freshness, focus, layers.
I think it's as well, it's not warm and it's not cool climate. We're kind of here where the line is kind of blurred, where you're like, where am I sitting here? Am I New World? Am I Old World? Where am I? Is it warm? Is it cool? Like everything is kind of, it's Chardonnay and it's delicious, but I feel like it's where like we get a little bit more of this, not as easy to define like cool and warm.
Yeah. Like cool and warm, I wish those words would go away anyway. I think you're totally on it. This is more like next world. And so, way to go, Chris. White Bones, you nailed it. Quails Gate number 2. Nice lineup.
It's a really interesting group of wines.
I mentioned there was no electricity in my note on this wine, but that's the style of this wine. It's always, and changing the style, like Jeff, we talked about that. It's not something that can happen overnight in a wine that's selling like crazy all the time. Is that correct, or what do we think about?
So you have to be very cognizant that as a winemaker, you have an audience that is scooping this up rapidly, and so they're expecting a certain style of wine, and you don't, so if you're going to be like looking at the style, or you think that you want to change the style, that's like you don't just do that. That's a conversation. That's an engagement with the Stewart family. This is a decision that's very serious. Yeah. And so you can't just kind of like, oh, I'm the new guy on the team, I'll just change the style of everything. You have to be very, very respectful of what the Stewart family have built up over many years.
I think it's the same for all of these wines, really. They all have they have a path. They can't just be changed overnight, these top brands.
Chardonnay is one of the
greatest varietal. It's loved by many in the world, and I think that this exercise was quite eye-opening to see how great Okanagan wine are doing right now. I think that as a Quebecer, we have more and more wine drinkers that are enthusiastic about drinking Canadian wines, being proud of discovering wines that are from our country. And the fun part of drinking some Canadian wine right now is that we have a very blurred line on what is New World or Old World. We're on a fresher expression of Chardonnay with a kiss of oak, so we're kind of sitting in this in-between that is quite a crowd pleaser for our Quebecer consumer.
Yeah, lots of power, quite rich, nice use of fruit and lees use. They balance each other out, excellent length, develops along the palate, beautiful summer day breeze on the finish.
So intense and so seriously good and nutty, and I loved it. I actually just wrote wow, wow. I didn't really care about the rest of the note, but it wasn't my top wine, but I gave it a huge score.
I'm kind of with Chris on this, where the crowd, there's a little bit of sweetness to it all. You know, everything else is there, like all the reductions there, all the wood's great, the balance is great. But I just, in the end, got a little bit of sweetness, and the very last note on the nose, a little bit of hand soap. It was almost a little bit,
hand soap,
a little bit too perfumey.
Are you talking about residual sugar? Are you talking about residual sugar, or like what's your problem with sweetness?
No, it's not.
It's not
sweetness. No, it's just a kind of confected, candied note to the fruit.
Ah, okay, that's quite a slag. What did you score, Dave?
I was actually 93.
And it was like the whole train has left the station. Like, it is such a persistent, complete wine on the finish. Like, it just delivers in every way. There's no part that stands out. I just thought it was like remarkably balanced.
I thought it was dirty. Like, to me, it was like dirty leaves.
Dirty leaves.
Balanced.
Well, I normally love reduction. Like, white Bordeaux I absolutely adore, and reductive styles of Chardonnay as well. But that's not what I'm finding in here. I think it's interesting that you said it's bound sulfur. I don't know that I've ever used those terms to say I can taste that, but it feels like the right thing to say, or just that hardness.
Yeah, I'm not
so somehow there's other ones where what I consider reduction are showing, and it's lavish, and I love it. And I know lots of other people would hate it because they would say they can't see the wine for the smoke.
But this whole thing about this affliction with reduction, like, so let's suggest that I'm a consumer and I know nothing about reduction. What's so beautiful about it?
I think we could say it's kind of that minerality, very obvious minerality. There's like, to me, it's like that smoky, flinty character. Okay.
So I just hate to put you on the spot, but I just like to get those kind of terms out. Yeah.
I thought it was solid. You know, I thought it had harmony, juicy, it was expressive. Maybe we're reacting to the fact that these are winemaking expressions and these are stylistic choices that are being made. And
the low aromatic intensity, I think others have commented on, that was the main thing for me. Yeah. It just wanted more.
Yes. It's kind of sitting in between. There's just a touch of reduction, but you're in the peach can and you're in the touch of oak that is there. So you're kind of standing in between. For me, it's a crowd pleaser.
Oh, I love this wine. It's kind of tied for my best wine of the day.
Yeah.
For me, it's always that toasted sesame seed or something, which I associate with some wines great wines from Burgundy, in fact. So it's that reduction is there, but I think as David says, it's there's other things going on as well, the concentration and there's a tanginess, a sappiness.
What are we tasting?
Wow. That's when you were saying.
Oh wow!
Wow!
It's Gitarna.
Wow! Okay.
Wow!
Oh,
Wow!
4.
Number 3.
Wow.
Wow.
As a buyer for restaurants and a wide variety of restaurants, from very high-end to very friendly everyday restaurants, Chardonnay is always a piece of that puzzle. You have to taste blind.
It's the best, right? You remove everything. You're just simply staring at 6 glasses, and then you look for nuance and you sort through it. It's the best way. You end up with the most honest, pure results that way, and then at the end you can look at the labels and be like, oh wow, you know, or I knew you were great and I found you, or shocking. You really get some awesome, shocking results in there. Perfect as a buyer, because you get to really find the nuance. What Quails Gate did today was exactly that. They brought the best wines in the universe to put forward today, and they shone. They did an excellent style, an excellent representation of Chardonnay. They were amazing. They were some of my favorite wines in that lineup, not knowing where they were or, you know, what was going on with them, but they were beautiful. Excellent job from Quails Gate.
I think one of the things with blind tastings is you never really know how they're going to go, and it's part of what makes them so exciting is that anything can happen on any given day. I was personally excited for how well Quails Gate did. The wines were right there, they didn't feel out of place. And I think the other thing was the amazing discussion we had with the panel. It was amazing to have different voices in the room, really intelligent, thoughtful conversation, and that to me says a lot about where the Canadian wine industry is heading to. I think one of the common refrains you hear from consumers, not just in BC but across Canada, is Canadian wine's expensive. And there's an element of truth there. This isn't $15 wine on the whole. But I think when you do competitive tastings like this, you see the caliber of wines that we line up against. You know, and with that in mind, there's value, a lot of value in Canadian wine, and especially in Okanagan wine.
I thought it was a fantastic day, and I was very gratified to see that Quails Gate wines showed very well. And we had an opportunity to taste some wines that were made in very different ways and different styles. You know, maybe is there something or some element or some nuance of some of these other wines that we could maybe incorporate into our winemaking, and maybe just kind of slowly ratchet up our, you know, our style, or maybe modify our style. We're going to at least have that conversation within the company.
One of the things I found really interesting and exciting for us as a winery is we had 3 vintages of Quails Gate Chard there, and the consistency of style and expression of our terroir was very strong. You know, there was not a lot of huge variation between our wines, and that was really exciting because those 3 years were 3 different winemaking teams. You know, some people on 2, but we were split across quite a few people and quite a few growing seasons, so really I think exciting to see a testament to our consistency, which we often talk about, but nice to see it, you know, demonstrated in practice.
So I think, you know, one of the things is from a tasting like this is to put Chardonnay back on the map. Not so much, of course, for those of us at the tasting, but to put it back on the map for consumers. So there's a big variety in styles that we saw today, but I think that's one of the things that people need to know about Chardonnay, is that Chardonnay is not just Chardonnay, that there are many styles, and to say that, you know, as a blanket statement that you don't like Chardonnay really doesn't make any sense.
Burgundy is inaccessible, and I think it's inaccessible in a few ways, financially because the prices are so high, but also the complexity. And I think for a lot of young people, they get overwhelmed by that complexity, so they just push it away and say, I want something I can relate to more easily, which I think is interesting. So I think there is some virtue in exploring what they've done and going towards that style. But ultimately, the prize isn't that you taste like a Burgundy, of course, it's that you express your vineyard.
In the end, it was kind of interesting to see how all the wines performed. And I think that the writers that were tasting blind were probably pretty surprised about some things, which is the great thing about tasting blind. But maybe the best takeaway for Quails Gate is that they never really disappeared into the tasting. And I think when they step back and look at the results, probably what they're going to think about is that they could maybe energize their top wines a little more. They could be a little more experimental with their top wines. Everything's good at the reserve level, but in the single blocks, they probably could do just a little bit more. Because what we saw in the room shows you that there's a wide spectrum of people out there tasting wine, and they all looking for something different. So moving your style, any Canadian winery that thinks they could move to the left or move to the right probably will not lose anything by trying that, and by trying it they may really improve their standing, you know, in the Chardonnay market.